All right, welcome back to Incorrectly Political. Today I'm joined by two guests, Peter and Cooper. Today we're going to be talking about high school versus college learning. So we brought Peter on today. He's actually a college student at Villanova. And then we also have Cooper, who is just like me, a high school student. Um, so we're going to be talking about, how you learn in high school versus college. We're going to be learning about how tests are different in college, and then finally we're going to be discussing homework in high school versus college. So to right off the bat, let's just get straight into it. Let's talk about learning lectures, like the college type of lectures versus high school where it's kind of like a daily lesson. So Peter, do you just want to quickly just talk about how learning is done in colleges real quick?
Yeah, so I think there's two types of classes in college. You have your general introductory, especially in science classes, and then you have more specific niche elective classes. And I think, at least in my opinion, part of the reason why I learned so much in college is because even in the lecture classes, there still is an element of engagement. I think a lot of times in high school, they talk about how they talk a lot about how classroom size is important to a student's development, and I think that's true. But I think high school grossly misuses their advantage of having low class numbers. They kind of treat it like a college lecture where the teacher essentially dictates information to you and students are supposed to just take down notes and memorize it. And while I think that's important in terms of getting a baseline um, level of information and knowledge, it really fails to stay with the student because they don't apply it and they don't really think about it. And even for science classes in college, we would at least once a week have smaller breakout groups where we would really engage and work with the topic so that we could reinforce what we learn. And I think for a lot of my humanities classes, there was no lectures at all, really. It was, and this will kind of come back to the homework, it was do the reading on your own time, write some notes and papers about your thoughts, but then we're going to come back to the classroom and we're not going to lecture you because the reality is, you guys are smart individuals who have an opinion about the literature. So we're just going to talk for an entire hour about what you thought was important, what you took away, and this really impacted you. And I think I learned a lot from that because not only did it, I guess, go against the idea of reinforcing only one point of view on literature or information, but it really allowed me to see a variety of opinions, and like the idea of diversity really comes into play here because the diverse experiences are kind of reflected in how you view a certain literature topic or a certain literature piece or even just any sort of information. Even in science, we worked through problems and we all had different ways of working through it instead of just, okay, so you're going to foil first, outside, inside, last. Um, you know, that doesn't always work for every student. So if you're going to talk about having smaller classroom sizes, then I think you really need to take advantage of the fact that, you should break out into smaller groups and discuss and have students teach other students instead of just lecturing one uniform way to approach a problem.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The point where I'd have to disagree really quick is I don't think that, sometimes using these lectures in high engaged groups always works in high school because a select few students are just going to choose not to participate. Whereas in college, you're paying for college. And so you're not always, or if you're paying for college, then everybody's going to be active and listening where you don't always have that in high school. Cooper, do you have anything to add to what Peter was saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think you both made really good points. I especially can see Benji's point about how the makeup of classrooms in high school does play a very significant role in the teachers and other students' abilities to make the class engaging and really have significant learning happen in a class period. Because, for instance, like you could have students that are distracting other students, or you could have, a period where the teacher does allow for group work, but in every group, there's only one or two students who are actually dedicating time and effort into the work. And one thing that comes to mind when you talk about the difference between sort of like engaging and more just sort of like spitting information at students is my freshman English class versus my sophomore history class. And my freshman English class, it was humanities class, obviously. And I was kind of going into it expecting that it would just be a lot of like literature and just sort of like, again, the whole idea of like spitting information at us. But um, our teacher really did a very good job at making it engaging and much less about like memorizing stuff and more about understanding it. And I think that was in part due to the teacher's ability to do that. And also, we kind of had a really good class. So it was sort of like a stroke of luck, but it'd be nice if more high school classes were like that because my sophomore history class was the polar opposite. It was just every day was the same, 45 minutes of lecture, you took notes, and then like every week you had a test. So it became really redundant and hard to want to go to that class.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point.
I just kind of want to fire back at your point about people being lazy and, in high school that's a problem, but in college it's not. I actually disagree with that. I think even still in college you'll get a lot of lazy teammates who don't necessarily want to put in the same amount of work or any work, and I think that's actually a good thing, especially if you really are bought into your education, because the reality is, lots of times in life and in the real world, you're gonna get stuck with um, teammates who do want to slack off and who don't want to put in their part. And what it teaches you is how to get around it. It means, yeah, you're gonna have to stay up till 1 a.m. sometimes doing someone else's part, but I mean that's part of life, and that's really like it. In my opinion, it prepares you more for the world instead of going back to the idea of just lecturing. I think high school is a lot of babysitting in the sense that, oh, the teachers will check to make sure you show up and make sure that you get your homework in on time. And while there's definitely benefits because it provides a sense of structure, I think it also ultimately can set some kids up to fail because there's a lack of responsibility. And then, you know, 2 months later, you're on your own. You're living on your own with, other 18-year-old kids. And, you can make a decision to go out and party, or you can make a decision to study. And for those who their structure comes externally where they're told what to do, when they're finally not told what to do, they just do what they want. So I think having that sense of responsibility, and if somebody else does something that you would like to do, like slack off, well, that doesn't necessarily mean it's good for you long term. So I actually think that it's a good thing, not necessarily that somebody slacks off, but it prepares you for the real world.
So that's a really good point. So tying this back to like kind of our high school versus college learning, how would you guys like kind of organize the two different groups of high school versus college, saying that college it's really like kind of like much better real world preparation because you have much more like free will in the aspect of how you want to structure your studying and learning, whereas high school you're babied kind of. And of course Peter would take the route that this free structure is much better at preparing you for the real world, because if you don't structure your time well, you'll crash and burn. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I don't know if you'd crash and burn, but I think it's a much tougher transition.
Mm.
It's a very tough transition to go from a lot of structure to no structure. So, and
Yeah,
I think schools try to do that. At least for my school, we had less classes and more open time, but we got more work, and I think that helps. But yeah, ultimately, I think, and I see the problems of just letting 17, 16-year-old kids do what they want, but ultimately at some point they're going to have to make that transition. So I think high schools would be a better time than just college, because at least you still have some structure from home.
I think one problem high schools may face in creating a more unstructured and uh, environment where students bear more of the responsibility is that high schools have to, especially public ones, they are burdened to meet, certain educational requirements and minimum standards.
All right. I think we kind of touched on, especially like the homework aspect because that's kind of like the main, organizing your time for structuring learning. Do you have anything either of you to add on to like how that impacts you when it comes to tests, really? Because obviously the homework leads into the test, but performing the tests themselves, at least, at Harvard High School, we have the retake options, and I'm just wondering your opinion to start, Peter, what you think about having retakeable tests in high school and whether, we should not do that so that we can prepare better for the real world or not.
Well, I think if you're gonna make people able to retake tests as much as they want, just kind of defeats the purpose of having a test in the first place. Like
Yeah.
the idea of a test is to check on whether you know it at a given time frame, and if you're just going to allow people to continue to retake it, then I think that leads to more people just memorizing stuff for the sake of the test as opposed to actually learning it. Um, so I think yeah, I wouldn't be for just infinitely retaking tests. At that point, I would just say abolish tests and let, I guess, homework and other stuff be graded. But I also don't think that's a great idea because that's a very controlled setting, and I think part of school, or not say part of school, but part of life is dealing with you know pressure and um, having to, I guess, perform on the spot. So I think there still is some value in just taking tests. And I think that's also where grade inflation has come in, and it's made getting into college much tougher because now schools don't have a great way to distinguish you from the next person. So I think it's really just a lose lose for schools and students.
Yeah, I think especially on the pressure point, that's a really good point because I think being able to deal with pressure and perform under pressure is really a critical role in the real world and when you have jobs. And I think tests provide a way to train for that. But if we abolish tests and we don't let people, at least the way I would look at it is, fail one or two tests and they have to learn how to do it themselves. I think that's a really crucial aspect sometimes in life for these students that are growing and developing, and so that they can be ready to actually, know how to structure their time and put in the work and perform on the spot when it really does matter, and not just, getting an F on a test in high school compared to a serious job problem. Do you have anything to add, Cooper?
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing about tests is that no matter how you administrate them, like it's sort of inevitable that people are going to learn stuff just for the test. And I mean, I think that's pretty clear with like AP tests, for example. Like you can't retake AP tests, but you know, after May, I would say probably 30% of most students' knowledge is about those subjects is probably gone or significantly diminished. And, and that's why I think restructuring tests as a whole to make them more educationally rewarding and not just like to boost your grade or to hurt it, I guess, if you didn't do well, but to make them more like hands-on and you're not just sitting there filling out a bubble sheet for an hour and a half, I think would benefit both students and teachers.
Mm-hmm. All right.
And kind of just building off that point, I think, like, in terms of my school or my college, a lot of our or some of our tests were structured in a way where they would actually give you all the information you need, but they make you think about how to apply that information. And with the internet becoming such a big thing, especially for the next generation, and always having access to it, I think the idea of memorization is going to become more and more just it's not needed. But knowing how to read an internet blog, synthesize it, and then formulate an opinion on it is something that's gonna gonna lead us. People who can do that are gonna lead us into the next generation of technology and job markets and everything like that. So I think one way to fix the idea of people just forgetting tests is to restructure how they are. You might not necessarily have to memorize everything, but you will have to learn it and understand it so that if you were to read it again, because let's face it, if you memorize something, you're going to forget it in the next 30 days. But if you were to read it again, you could be like, oh, yeah, I remember learning about this. And these were my thoughts. And this is why. And I think that is something that stays longer than just saying, oh, you know, a human belongs to the or is a homo sapien, and they belong to X family in X phylum or whatever.
Yeah. Does anybody else have anything to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to build on that point about like synthesis and analysis versus just memorization. I think that really needs to be emphasized because like Peter said, today you can find essentially everything on the internet. Like any piece of information you want to know, you could probably find somewhere. Um so it like he said, the focus needs to be less on whether you know it or can find it within your brain, but more on whether you know how to use it or not. And I think a good example of this is like learning how to program because a lot of people will start off like going down a YouTube rabbit hole or reading like buying courses and watching all these videos and watching people do it. And that's actually, that's the mistake I made as a beginner. I just watched and watched and watched. And I never actually did. So I think, and when I really started to understand it is when I actually like did my first project. So I think applying that same logic to education and tests in school would benefit, again, like I said, students and teachers.
All right. Well, this was a really good conversation. I think it was really good having the 2 points of view. The takeaway of having to learn how to structure your time is really crucial. And I think Peter had the idea that that should be really learned in high school, as well as the fact that learning how to not just memorizing data really isn't as important these days. And I think, as a high schooler, I feel like we have to do that all the time. And, when you take the next big step into college, I think learning how to apply that is really where you can learn to get ready for the real world, I guess. Thank you for everybody tuning in today. We really appreciate it, and we'll be back next time.